Hello, and welcome to OnPoint, a podcast by Oak Street Funding, where we sit down with industry leaders to bring insights to the topics you want to hear about. I'm your host today, Jay Douglas, Vice President of Strategic Markets here at Oak Street Funding. Now, let's get on point. Today, I'm joined by Emily Blue, founder at Hue Partners. We are going to be discussing an exciting but challenging topic: the onboarding process after an acquisition. We'll touch on the misconceptions of onboarding, how to work with those who might be resistant to change, how to keep the momentum going afterwards, and much more. Emily, thank you so much for joining me today.
Jay, thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
To start, let's discuss onboarding broadly. Are there different ways to onboard? If so, is one way more effective than another?
Yeah, every firm has slightly different onboarding practices. There's no, wrong or right way per se to do it. But I will say there are some experiences that are far better than others for the acquired firm. The firm that approaches onboarding through the lens of kind of like stairs does it the very best. You know, trying to come at your new partners day one of their first day in partnership with every department reaching out to them with a flurry of requests and to-dos, that is not very helpful. If you take the stair approach, it's, what is needed to get up and off the ground for day one. Step two is like, how do you get through week one? And what are all the things that are necessary to, take care of clients, to answer those client questions on that first week? And you keep climbing those stairs. Because a lot of people try to approach integration and onboarding, especially onboarding, through the lens of let's try to get onboarding done in a week or a month or 90 days. And the best onboarding truly happens over a much longer period of time and much gradual process with multiple connection points built into that process.
I think that's an outstanding analogy of using and thinking about onboarding as a stair, that you're walking
Yeah.
up a stair and building towards it. That's really great. Let's pivot to misconceptions though. What are some of the common misconceptions about onboarding during and post acquisition?
Yeah, onboarding tends to get defined incorrectly as an HR to do. So it's solely HR's job to onboard, new employees as well as new firms that come through acquisition. And that really is the wrong approach to take to onboarding. Onboarding should be a firm wide initiative. Everyone should be rolling up their sleeves. Every department should be invested in helping, onboard and integrate their fellow partner firm to really set the firm up for maximum success. The other misconception that I commonly see is they try to relate onboarding to a period of time. And it's really hard to, put a time and a clock and when things are going to be done. You really should be taking kind of an approach to you're a continuous learner, right? You're continuing to learn new approaches, and whether you call that onboarding or not, it doesn't really have an end. You should be building relationships throughout that partnership. You should be learning together throughout that partnership. And so those are kind of the two biggest misconceptions that we tend to see as it relates to approaching onboarding.
We all know how important it is to align cultures, but what other crucial elements should be considered when onboarding?
Yes, that's such an important, question because one of the things that gets lost, especially in the world of M&A, is really having a deep understanding and appreciation for where they came from. You can't really onboard or integrate well if you haven't first spent time diligencing and understanding what systems did they, come from? What systems did they utilize? What processes were they utilizing with their clients? What are they used to expecting as it relates to, day-to-day operations and kind of workflows. When you understand where they came from and you have insight into the direction of what post-close integration looks like, it becomes much easier to build a roadmap from point A to point B. Everybody wants to get to point B, but if you don't first have an appreciation and an understanding from where they're coming from, what they're used to, you can have a lot of missteps, miscommunications, missed expectations of, what that change box and navigating that can look like.
So, thinking about that point A, and maybe even before that, how important is it to have a core group of values that align between the two firms?
It's everything. Truly, it is everything and cannot be underscored enough. When you think about the happiest partnerships, it really boils down to a deep alignment on a set of core values. You can do things differently. You can have different microcultures with across different offices within a firm, but without a common set of core values, you're missing the opportunity to create a vocabulary and a decision-making framework that aligns across all the different offices, all the different microcultures that exist within your macro culture. And when you try to integrate from a space of, different values, it's very challenging. Like that is where you can have a lot of frustrating, conversations, a lot of hiccups along the way. When you can operate from a space of core values being aligned, it creates an understanding of why some of these decisions are being made, and it creates a vision that is aligned across all of your colleagues, and everybody can row in the same direction.
So, switching now to the client facing side of things, how do you ease client transition and what's the best practice for communicating with clients through the onboarding process?
Such an important, topic. And advisors are so used to being the go-to resource, right? When a client needs anything at all, they can pick up their phone and they can call the advisor and ask whatever questions on their mind. When you're going through an integration process, it's temporary, but that doesn't mean it's not overwhelming for an advisor because they're so used to knowing the answer, knowing how to do it, that not knowing is uncomfortable. And so what you can see in some advisors is there's this pullback in let's wait to communicate with the client until we have the answers and we feel really confident about the process and we know all, everything there is to know. That's a missed opportunity because your clients are actually expecting during the transition for you to over communicate. Your clients are expecting you to sit with them through the change, not just list off a bunch of to-dos that they need to go do, but actually sit with them and make sure they can get on the app. Make sure their login is working. Can they see that report that they should be seeing? That is what creates that moment of connection with your client. And it's totally okay for an advisor to have a question from a client where because they're in the integration window, they don't know, they wanna triple check with some department on the answer. Just say that. Just say, "That's a great question. Let me come back to you. I wanna ask my colleague who is a deep expert in XYZ, arena." And so that forces an advisor to get out of their comfort zone of, like, not knowing everything during the integration period, but dialing up communication when it's most needed is what eases the client through that transition.
So, speaking of transition, we all know change doesn't come easy for everyone. What are some ways maybe to manage those who might be resistant to those needed changes?
Yeah, change is hard. Even for people that are big fans of change, it is still challenging. And then you have employees that and colleagues that don't like change at all and just like doing it the way they've always done it. For those individuals, they have to see the vision. They have to see beyond integration and what life is like after the integration, and they have to see the value in why making this change is gonna be so additive to their office, to the broader firm's initiatives. And so being able to paint that vision is really imperative. And the other thing that I would say that really does help, individuals that don't like change is when a partner firm can say, listen, we are actually investing some of our team's resources and our expertise. They're going to roll up their sleeves and sit beside you as you work through this. So it doesn't feel like they're alone in the change box. That goes such a long ways. It builds relationships. They will never forget, that so and so, was really helpful during that really tricky kind of step of the integration process. Because when you're in it, and you're working through integration, your day to day, you think it's gonna be like that next week, and the next month. You lose sight so quickly that integration and change is temporary, and there's another side of change. So it's really important to help kind of pull them out of that change box so they can see beyond, this temporary period of time.
Thinking now and a little pivot here, how can technology and possibly AI help to facilitate that onboarding process?
Oh, the role that technology has played in our industry is wild, right? So say 5 years ago, take 5 years ago, an acquisition that was made, if you were to estimate how long it would take to get through integration, the estimate would be about 2 to 3 years, sometimes more, to navigate all the changes that are required to fully integrate one firm into another. Today, because of technology and because of the investment that's been made in integration, we're seeing integrations being done in a fraction of the time. And that's so incredibly meaningful, especially in an industry that's centered around client relationships, because the quicker an office can get out of integration and back to servicing clients and being out in the community, they get back to doing what, they're passionate about and why they chose to partner in the first place. And so we are gonna continue to see technology shorten that integration and that painful window of time more and more, and make some of those more manual, tasks more automated and save a lot of, frustration.
Well, along the same topic of technology, are there any specific onboarding strategies for integrating those remote teams or branches?
Yes, we have seen an actual fully remote team go through a full-blown integration. And one of the things that I just loved seeing about, that integration process is that it's easy to think because the entire office is remote, everything has to be done over Zoom. And this particular partner firm said, "We're actually gonna invite the entire remote office to our headquarters." And they spent a day meeting the colleagues of different departments. They went to dinner and broke bread and, built relationships with each other. And they did that prior to, close, prior to onboarding ever, occurring and integration, project plans ever being shared. And the power that had was significant. You take that moment and that experience of all coming together, and the team remembers that forever. But when they're working through integration and they're on those Zooms, they say, like, we had dinner, we sat by each other, and that's huge. And so just because a team is remote does not mean there's not an opportunity to create connection points outside of, the Zoom workflow. So if you can create a moment to bring people together in person, it goes a long ways when you're going through and kind of working through integration. So that's one of the best things that I've seen a firm do.
Well, let's talk about some specific cases. And this is a two-part question. Can you share an example of a company that went through the onboarding process and they did it right? They crushed it. And then maybe one that didn't quite crush it. What could that one have done better? So maybe just both sides of that.
Absolutely. We've seen a firm, go through an acquisition process, and prior to close, they flew out the entire leadership team to the selling firm's organization, and they started with something that's really important, and they started with why they are excited to partner with them. What they found really exciting and attractive about that partnership. And then they started talking about the vision of what the collective groups can do together, why they're excited about the partnership. They took time to offer one on ones with different departmental leaders so that if somebody had an HR question, they didn't really feel like asking in a group setting. They could ask that. They had, just a lot of opportunity for connection. And what that connection did was it created an opportunity for relationships to be formed early and get them focused on the right things. Get them focused on life after integration, thinking about the niches they want to go into, the, markets they want to expand, into, some of the events they want to host together. They started dreaming about those things, which created significant amounts of energy. On the flip side of that, I've also seen, a partner firm, talk about and come in, post close to build relationships and try to make that connection, but do it from the lens of here is what we can do. Here's all of our best practices. Here's, how we do things is great. Here's our great technology that you're going to be coming into. And they didn't appreciate, where this firm came from, what they did well, why they were attracted. And so they started, 10 steps behind on relationship building and focused on, all of the change that was going to be kind of forced down, through the integration period. And so that slight subtlety sets both of those firms on completely different trajectories from a relationship building, from a growth perspective, from an eagerness to integrate. And so that is like one of the best, comparisons of like what to do well and like what not to do.
Well, Emily, it's really been some great insights that you've shared. We've unfortunately come to the end, so just really two more final questions before we wrap up here. How can firms keep the momentum going after an initial onboarding? And you've kind of touched on this, but how does the process ever truly end of onboarding?
Yeah, it's very similar to the question of like, how do you keep culture intact while growing, and it's through that lens of, onboarding never ends, right? Like connecting with your colleagues across the country never ends. And so how to keep that momentum is to continue to find ways to create connection points amongst other advisors, other individuals within the departments, cross-departmental connection points. Maybe it's an annual event that you extend the invite a little bit broader one year to like really bring everybody together, really focusing that momentum around connection and storytelling and the sharing of best practices is what will continue to fuel that momentum and carry you forward.
Emily, thank you so much again for being here
Thank
and
you.
spending this time with us. I picked up on some great insights and I'm confident our listeners did as well.
Yes, well, thank you for having me.
And thank you all for listening to On Point, a podcast by Oak Street Funding. I'm Jay Douglas. Tune in next time when we continue to sit down with more industry leaders wherever you listen to podcasts as we get on point. Before you go, though, don't forget to rate and review on Spotify, like and subscribe on YouTube, and follow us on Instagram for more insights and behind the scenes content. You can find us at onpoint.with.osf. See you next time.